A Musical Life with composers Daron Hagen and Gilda Lyons. Daron Hagen and Gilda Lyons are versatile composers, musicians, and artists. They're also husband and wife, and frequently collaborate together. Darren has written symphonies, operas, art songs, and chamber works, and is also a contributing writer to the Huffington Post. Gilda is a vocalist and visual artist, in addition to being a prolific and incredibly creative composer. This episode of A Musical Life is brought to you by Audible.com, the leading source of audiobooks online with over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, or MP3 player. Visit audibletrial.com/A Musical Life and get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial. Once again, that's audibletrial.com/A Musical Life. Welcome to A Musical Life. I'm Hugh Sung. Darren and I were students together at the Curtis Institute of Music. We recently caught up when he asked me to help him with a run-through of his new Symphony No. 5 with the Orchestra Society of Philadelphia. Darren's symphony was officially premiered by the Phoenix Symphony Orchestra under the baton of Michael Christie with soprano soloist Victoria Vargas this past October 2015. Before we get started with my interview with Darren and Gilda, let's listen to a little bit of the last movement of Darren's newest symphony. Darren and Jolla, thank you so much for being on the show today.
It was such a pleasure.
My pleasure. So for both of you, Darren and Gilda, I really want to explore your music. Let's for folks who have never heard of either of you before, I'm wondering if you could share 3 songs, 3 pieces, and tell us a little of the story of each of them, how they came to be, what they're trying to say, perhaps start with something small, something big, whatever you would like to do, but maybe think of 3 songs, if you can, because you both are prolific writers. But how would you introduce somebody to your sound world, your musical world, your art world? And for Gilda and you in particular, I don't want to limit you to just music. If you had a particular art piece or even something that somebody could look at in addition to your music, maybe you can contribute to that as well.
Well, since you couched it that way, I've now switched the piece in my head. So I have a piece called Coney Run, and it integrates live vocalist with pre-recorded sound and piano. And that, to me, speaks to the visual element. It was commissioned by a duo called Two Side Sounding, specifically for a piece, for a program about Coney Island.
I was going to say, is there something?
Yes.
It is Coney Island.
And
okay.
You know what? I have never been to Coney Island, and I wasn't going to Coney Island that spring. But I did. I actually love the research part of any new commission. And so I did a lot of commissions about Coney Island. And I really didn't have an interest in a kind of bizarre, like as in circus sort of piece. And that to me was always the flavor of kind of, I associate it with the thunderbolt, and I associate
the Wonder Wheel.
Yeah, all of those, the spectacle. But I found these wonderful Sarah Teasdale poems, and she had written a beautiful poem about Coney Island, and the first line is, "Why did you bring me here? The sands are white with snow." And I just thought, oh, what a cool place to start. And so I really focused on location. I focused on the wave sounds and to open and close the piece. And I call that daybreak, as if you were waking up. If you'd slept on the beach in Coney Island, what that might have been, and then had a day. And so there's a movement called Giant Lobster. Because that was a newspaper article. Giant Lobster finds a new home on Coney Island. Giant.
Giant lobster finds a new home in Coney Island. An 18-pound crustacean was caught weeks ago off the coast of Canada and sent in a 2-ton shipment to the New England Lobster Company in San Francisco. New England Lobster's bookkeeper set out to save the giant creature when it was received on the West Coast. She told the Daily News, quote,
"This seemed like a lousy way to go."
Darren, I'm going to let's pass the ball to you.
Well, I sound like such a boring person compared to that, but I was thinking that it would be nice to introduce myself to folks with an art song of mine. First of all, art song is a very off-putting term, isn't it? It's a song of mine called Holy Thursday. Gilda and I often perform it together. It is a setting of a poem by the great Irish poet Paul Muldoon, with whom I wrote 4 operas, actually. It was one of the first of his poems I ever set back in the early 90s, I guess. And it's about a couple sitting in a restaurant after hours with the waiter wandering around sort of hoping that they'll leave. And it captures the moment when they realize that their love affair is over. But of course, it's Paul Muldoon, so it also is called Holy Thursday, which of course was the night of the Last Supper. So it's the Last Supper for this couple, but it's also a meditation on the Last Supper, the relationship between man and God. Paul is Catholic, or was Catholic, and I found that ability to take the high and low, the mundane and the sacred and the profane, and combine them in that way, intensely moving. So what I did was I took the 2-bar bridge from The Man I Love, and I built a whole song out of it. It became the accompaniment pattern to a song.
How cool.
That modulates a lot.
Well, if you've got a 2-bar bridge, it's going to bridge.
Gotta do something.
But see, in the metaphor is the music, because you're bridging from one emotional state to the next. Consequently, if you're a tonal composer, as I am, I mean, I use serial resources and all that other long hair jazz. But if you're going to go somewhere, go. Yeah. And tell us by using the key signature. He was rolling his eyes.
Gilda, I'm going to pass the ball back to you. Another word, perhaps? We've had a day in the carnival. Or so.
My mom is from Nicaragua, and we go back regularly. We're going to be heading back there with our little boys for a family visit in January. And I have a piano trio called Folklorico, which I used images from my time there and stories growing up as a starting place. So I've got 4 movements, and the first is Resplendent Quetzal, which is all about the gesture of the Quetzal, whose wings are so long that it actually has to do a full turn to wind them around itself before it sits down.
So it's a bird.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, sorry. So the Quetzal is one of the images that I've seen a lot in my time in Nicaragua and also Costa Rica. But that I liked the idea. I think visually, I often start with images, even if I don't tell anybody and just have a pure piece of music, but I often start with images. And so I was just very clear about the images that I was working with for this piano trio. And the Quetzal, the image that interested me was, how do you denote that expansive wing? Yeah. And how do you note the circling of the wing as it nestles into its nest?
Now, I'm curious. Let's hear how do you make music that sounds like circling, like a wing? I mean, this is the kind of stuff that's so fascinating. Let's see what this sounds like. we do have a shared history. We went to Curtis together as students. And then many years later, I had the opportunity to perform your second. No, it wasn't somebody. Didn't somebody else?
That's right. Sorry.
We premiered it here in Philadelphia.
Yes.
But with Jeffrey Kainer, principal flute player of the Philadelphia Orchestra, and myself at the piano, we performed your second flute and piano sonata here at Curtis's Field Hall.
An obscenely difficult piece, which the two of you dispatched with such elan, and sort of it was hard partly because you can't write a piece for Jeff and not have it be hard because he can do anything. And once I knew you were going to play it, I wasn't afraid. You played magnificently, and I think probably my favorite movement was the third movement,
which has that SOS theme that you did in this new symphony.
So we'll have a theme going on here. Well, SOS is sort of an ongoing theme in my life, as it is with
SOS and Morse code, I should say. That Morse code rhythm, da 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 da. It was so cool.
Actually, it was written as straight quarter notes, but in time during the rehearsals, the SOS nature of it came out. No, why don't we play that third movement? Because
sure,
the two of you ripped through it like a forest fire.
Gilda, I'm going to pass the ball back to you. Perhaps one final work we can talk about, or
Bone Needles is a working song for two voices, and it's still one of my favorite pieces. It was commissioned specifically for a dance by a dancer, and it was written right after we had come back from Nicaragua again, and I had stepped on something in the water when I was up to up to my shoulders, and I put my foot down in the sand, and something went right through my foot. And it was terrifying because, of course, if that happens, then it must be all around me. And what was it? And luckily I do yoga. I picked my foot up out of the water, and I had a puncture wound. And it was also a beautiful moment where you always know you married the right person if you did. And here I was trying to walk, and it was not possible because, I mean, I don't want to be gross, but there was a lot of blood. And every time I walked, it was worse. And, you know, we're in Nicaragua, and we're quite a distance away from any kind of medical treatment. And we had, of course, taken a long, long walk along the beach, so just even to get back to our house. And Darren picked me up and carried me back to the house. Yes, so after the trauma has been treated, addressed, we were sitting on the porch of I did a lot of sitting after that. We were sitting on the porch overlooking the ocean, and we saw the women running out to meet the boats, the fishing boats that had come in. And then the women collect the nets, and they mend any holes, and they do it with these really long needles that are fashioned out of bones. So I watched a couple of things of interest for me in this moment where I was mending myself and watching them run out in this routine that it's part of their lives. It's a rhythm, and they run out, they get and then they work together to mend these nets. And I thought of how my mending related to that mending, and I thought about the activity of all of a sudden, all these people who were doing their own thing rush to one project, one task, and work together, and then they go off again. And that this is a rhythm to their lives. And so that's very much the story of Bone Needles as the arc of the very short two-voice piece.
How did you both meet?
We were actually
Friends for a long
friends
time.
for a very long time, and colleagues for a long time, and we both knew each other through some kind of dark times and difficult times, and it was when it was the least convenient possible moment for us to find any kind of romantic stuff there. I was living in Pittsburgh, and he was, of course, based in New York City. And we started talking about professional stuff, and I had an unpleasant interaction with an older colleague, and Darren reacted with an intensity that was a little bit not like a friend. It was the way that, it's one thing with when you're talking to a colleague down, and it's another thing when it's your spouse that's been somehow someone's trying to manipulate them,
But this is before anything.
This was before anything.
No one was more surprised than me at the ferocity of my reaction, because I had no intention of marrying anyone, let alone getting involved with anyone. Music was it. I was married to music.
We actually have a couch that we call the monk bed still, because that was Darren's monk bed when he was a single guy. He was a monk. He's going to sleep in that.
My bedroom in my apartment in New York, I had turned it into an office. And I slept on the couch in the living room. It all sounds quite squalid now. Since Gilda shared something about extended vocal techniques, I wanted to share one last thing, which I thought might be kind of fun. It's a 90-second piece called The Last of Lizzie. And what I've been doing the last couple of years, without fanfare, is interweaving soundscapes, electroacoustic soundscapes, into my operas.
Oh, cool.
So that a woman in Morocco, for example, has about 20 minutes worth of pre-recorded soundscapes that the audience isn't even really aware of when they go to the theater. When you go to the movies, you hear all sorts of things like didgeridoo and mashed up cultures in soundtracks. And in particularly in premium TV, these soundtracks often skip through cultures and very strange instrumentations because the composer did it in their underwear in their living room on using a synthesizer, using patches. But in order to expand the sonic resources of the orchestra and enhance the storytelling, I've begun doing this. And this particular 90-second soundscape occurs in A Woman in Morocco when the title character is abducted by her lover and her lover's friend and led away to a fate unknown.
Darren, you are a gifted communicator, writer, and you actually contribute regularly to the Huffington Post, exploring the reasons behind your life and work as a composer. A few weeks ago, you wrote a very moving tribute to your mother, Gwen Hagen, who died in your arms shortly after you graduated from the Curtis Institute of Music.
No, I was a student.
Oh, you were still a student?
I was in the middle of my first year.
And again, if this is too painful, we don't have to talk about it.
Oh, it was a long time ago.
Yeah, but still, you've also written about the Yaddo Artist Retreat in upstate New York, which in itself has its genesis in unbelievable tragedy. And last night I was actually surprised as we were reading through your Symphony Number 5, the movement that has the hospital bed scene. You brought up an incident with a friend that we both knew when we were students.
Yes.
And he, I actually remember Curtis T. in wintertime. And he came in, but in clothes that were clearly too cold for the weather. Said, "Hey, is everything okay?" I kind of approached him, and he just stood there, put his hands to his head, and started screaming at the top of his lungs. I think shortly after that, he hung himself. I was surprised and moved that you shared that incident, which I hadn't really, relived in my mind since that happened so many years ago. I'm wondering, can you share your thoughts on the role that music has in addressing and transforming these experiences?
Well, music remembers. For many years, I carried a secret around. It began when my mother died, when I was a Curtis student with you, and at the time our friend died. And my secret was that I saw dead people. Here we are in Philadelphia, and the third sense or whatever? Sixth sense. But I actually did. I wrote the opera Amelia, and Amelia sees all of her deceased relatives. She also sees other things, but the relatives were my idea. When I would be sitting composing, I would see my mother across the room, or I would see our friend, or my father, or other people. And it was they have drugs for that. Is the natural response to this. But I mean, I didn't think that I was psychotic or anything like that. It was just sort of a natural evocation of my poetic memory, and I needed these people to be around because I had unfinished business with them in myself. And when I wrote Amelia, it was a cathartic experience for me because the opera ends with this woman giving birth. And I wrote it as a tribute to my first son, Atticus, our first son. It was cathartic for me because the woman gives birth, Amelia gives birth to her little baby, and she's surrounded by hospital workers and so forth, but it's revealed that they're all her relatives. And everyone she's known and lost is with her, and at the moment that she gives birth to her child, they all just start going away. And that was my truth, because in writing that opera, I shared that truth, which I think many, many, many people have. We do carry people around with us until we're ready to let them go. I let all of those people go. It was like an enormous wake. And I didn't know what to do with myself. The premiere of a large opera, even though that was my 7th or 8th opera, is a huge emotional and psychological undertaking for a composer. You're hopelessly overexposed. And the critics are going to say nasty things, or they're not going to tell you what you want to hear, and you're going to want to lash out at them. But it's only because you're so overexposed. And if you feel that way, it was because you did a good thing. You shared your stuff and you put it out there, and hopefully it will go away. And what I was not expected for was that they would go away, and they did with the end of that opera and with the birth of our first son. The reason I went through that long explanation is that music, however, will always, just as pop music takes you back to who you were when you first heard it on the car radio on a date, concert music, classical music, does the same thing, only in a richer, more deeply contextual way, because it also mines the truths of the situation. So it doesn't just memorialize people, it creates a fresh environment in which we can interact with loss, and we can transform loss into new life. That is something that fired 30 years worth of my work, and something that I still think the transformative nature of art is one of the things that draws most of us to it. But that particular reason is why I used our friend as the motivator for that particular movement. The symphony as a whole is in memory of my brother. And the Phoenix Symphony commissioned it in memory of my brother. So that's a longish answer to I think, a very deep question there. It's not too personal or painful. I think that I wedded with the struggle of passing from life to death by having a number of people pass away in my arms. I ended up being sort of the go-to fella in the 80s and 90s when we lost so many people to AIDS, because I was able to not so much comfort, but simply be a witness.
Gilda, did you want to speak to this in any fashion, or?
I suppose just from a selfish point of view, it's not entirely selfish, though. I guess art can be selfish, period, no matter what you're dealing with. As a creative artist, you're taking up everybody's time. So it's inherently selfish to be an artist. At the same time, people like having artists around, because in exploring something, you're offering something that can help other people heal. And in healing yourself through when you're exploring something that was particularly painful, some kind of horrible loss, then you're offering something up that maybe takes someone else on a journey of healing as well. The Tortugas Lament movement that I mentioned from Folklorico actually started as a song cycle that was commissioned right after we had returned from Nicaragua, and it was originally written for two voices and cello, and I wrote it right after we had miscarried in Nicaragua, which a miscarriage in the States with the doctor that you know is one thing, and then it adds another layer of stuff when you're far away from home in a place it's hard to get treatment. But I mean, all this is to say, I would never get up and say to an audience, this is about this terrible, horrible, deeply personal thing. I think the music needs to stand. But even though very few people know that about that piece, there is a lament that is being offered up. And it needs to be abstract so that anyone hearing it can respond with their own lament and move through some kind of catharsis.
And because we're all artists here, we're bringing it full circle here. The art is life paradigm holds when you transform the experience of life. Death is a very important part of life. To transform that as well, to transfigure that, to use a lot of key words from the repertoire into life and into art, is to continue the examined existence.
Gilda, Darren, I can't thank you enough for spending time on the show. It's been just so much fun working with you, and a deep honor and pleasure to kind of explore and mine both of your amazing output of art and music. Thank you so much for being with me.
Oh, thanks so much.
Thanks, Hugh.
This episode of A Musical Life has been brought to you by Audible.com, the leading online source for great audiobooks for your iPhone, Android, or MP3 player. Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. If you'd like to dive deeper into the world of classical music, then I think you'll really enjoy How to Listen to and Understand Great Music by Professor Robert Greenberg. Filled with entertaining anecdotes in a witty, informative style, Professor Greenberg's lectures will give you a deeper understanding of the musical language and help you hear and understand what the greatest composers in history are actually saying to us. To download your free copy of How to Listen to and Understand Great Music or any other audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/A Musical Life. Again, that's audibletrial.com/A Musical Life for your free audiobook. For links to Darren's and Gilda's websites, be sure to visit the show notes at amusicallife.com. And be sure to leave a comment or send me your feedback by email at stories@amusicallife.com. I'd love to hear from you. If you like this show, tell a friend or share a link on Facebook or Twitter. Be sure to subscribe to A Musical Life through iTunes or Stitcher or with your favorite podcast playing app. And consider posting a review in iTunes by going to amusicallife.com/review. We're currently listed near the top of iTunes' new and noteworthy section of the music podcast category. Your iTunes subscriptions and reviews help to share this show with other listeners, so thank you for all your support. Until next time, I'm Hugh Sung, and I wish you a musical life.